Hi, and welcome everyone joining us for today's virtual campus forum, our COVID-19 update and what comes next. I'm Kelly Tyrell. I'm the Director of Research Communications here at UW-Madison, and I'll be moderating the event today. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that you can submit questions live for our panelists at the link provided in the description and also here on your screen. It's go.wisc.edu/S22, like spring 22, questions. A live caption link can also be found in the YouTube description. So why are we here today? It's lost on no one that we've been dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic for almost more than 2 years now. It's been a difficult time for many of us, and a lot has changed. Now we're being asked to make more changes in how we deal with the virus and its spread, while still keeping ourselves and our community safe. At this stage of the pandemic, the majority of people in our community in particular have built some level of immunity through vaccination. We have an incredibly high vaccination rate here on campus and in Dane County, or through infection, or both. This doesn't mean that the pandemic is over or that COVID-19 is going away. It just means that we can change how we continue to protect ourselves and our families and those who we interact with. So we're here today because campus is listening to people's concerns, is consistently evaluating guidance from public health experts, and campus continues to work with healthcare agencies and experts in Dane County and in the state to adjust campus guidelines. Today's panelists are here to help explain our policies on campus going forward, to address some of the questions you may have, and we're going to do our best to get to as many of your questions as we can. And also try to address concerns. Don't forget, though, we also have information at covidresponse.wisc.edu, including a lot of FAQs that are updated regularly. And if we don't have a chance to answer your questions this hour, you might find answers to your questions there. So now I want to introduce our panelists. We have Dr. Devlin Cole, who's a physician at the UW School of Medicine and Public Health, and she focuses on preventing illness. We also have Jake Baggett, who is the Executive Director at UHS and our Associate Vice Chancellor for Health and Wellbeing. And he can talk a bit about what's getting tongue-tied so early. He can talk about what's gone into some of our campus decisions. And finally, but of course he's not least, though he's last, is John Zembrennan. He's our Vice Provost for Teaching and Learning, and John can really talk to the unique concerns of our faculty, staff, and student instructors. So thank each of you for being here. Really glad that you're taking your lunch hour to address people's questions. Again, I want to remind you that you can submit questions as we go along. We have some helpful people in the background who are helping share those with me so that I can share them with our panelists. You can find the link here on the screen and also in the YouTube description. So to go around the horn, just to get us started, I want to go to Dr. Cole. So Dr. Cole, can we feel safe and protected in the absence of a mask requirement, knowing that Dane County is going to be letting its order expire on March 1st and campus follow shortly behind on March 12th?
That's a great question. And the short answer is yes, we can feel safe and protected. The longer answer requires a little bit more epidemiology, but you mentioned it actually in the beginning of your intro. We have a highly vaccinated population. A lot of people have been getting booster shots, and we also have a lot of immunity because we've recently had a lot of people that were sick and recovered. So those three things together have made this county in particular have very slow rates of transmission right now. Our case rates are dropping actually pretty sharply, which is impressive. So right now on the epidemiologic curve is the right time to start using less of the tools in our toolbox that we have. So one, we have more tools if we need to use them later, but two, because we want to start getting used to what it's going to feel like to get kind of, I hate to use the words back to normal, but forging a new normal as we go ahead. So there's a difference between are we safe in reality and do we feel safe? And so the feeling of safety may take a little bit more practice, but it's a-okay to keep using your mask in places where you feel like you have more risk. And it's also a-okay to start practicing the new world of showing the bottom half of your face to everyone else again, and to kind of get more accustomed to the normal risks that we were taking before the pandemic.
Thanks, Dr. Cole. I imagine, Jake, that probably does feed into some of why campus made the decision to end the mask mandate. I would say now, but we have a couple of weeks. Can you maybe provide us a little bit more background as to why and how that decision was made?
Absolutely. As we have throughout this whole experience, the whole pandemic, we've been looking at the data and really looking to what our experience and the data and the trends have shown us. And so this is something we've been expecting to reach this point. And so the fact that many of our partners, including PHMDC and other areas, have reached a similar conclusion did not come as a surprise to us. You know, we've gotten past the peak here. We have a highly vaccinated population, and we're at the right point to do that. So the March 1st date was really a date that I think was pretty well informed for PHMDC to make that decision. It's certainly a decision I support. But we also know we want to give people time to adjust to that change. You know, going to what Dr. Cole was speaking to, the idea that people need a little bit of time to adjust to what this feels like. And so extending our current expectation to March 12th allows that additional time for people to adjust to the changes and get comfortable with that.
Thank you, Jake. And John, I know this is something that we're hearing from instructors about. And so can you make some recommendations for instructors right off the bat? We'll get into specifics, I think, with some of the questions we've already seen. But can you make some recommendations for how instructors in particular can navigate the change?
Sure, I'm happy to, Kelly. And, you know, I can answer this really as an instructor. I'm teaching this semester. And so since the news came out last week about the phasing out of the mask mandate, I've been thinking about how I will navigate this. And, you know, we're now in a situation where we're moving from the choice of whether or not to wear a mask being sort of, again, mandated by campus to an individual choice. And so I think the first thing is, like everybody else on campus, I, as an instructor, have a decision to make for myself, or probably it's more accurate to say a series of different decisions, because it may be that I make different decisions about whether to wear a mask depending upon the particular context I find myself in at work. But I've got a decision myself to make about whether to wear a mask. And so we'll be thinking, of course, about that in a kind of dynamic and ongoing way. I happen to be team teaching the course I have this semester, so I have a co-instructor. We haven't talked yet about how we're going to approach masks in our classroom, but look forward to an upcoming, collegial conversation with my colleague about how we'll handle masks in our classrooms. You will have seen a message from my office earlier this week that indicated that instructors can recommend that students wear masks in the classroom, but not require. So I'll be talking with my co-instructor about what we want to say to our students in our class about masks. If we do decide to recommend that students wear masks, you know, it's also our responsibility to make sure that we say that it's not required, and to emphasize that students are now in a space where they need to make an individual choice about wearing masks, regardless of what we recommend or don't recommend, and that there won't be any reward or punishment for their decision around wearing masks. So it's a series of choices to make, and a series of, I think, careful, collegial, thoughtful conversations to have.
Thanks, John. So we have already received more than 100 questions from students and employees for our forum today, and I'm sure we'll get more as we progress. So I want to just go ahead and get started asking some of the questions we've received. Jake, you already spoke a little bit about this, but we have a question. Why is the mask mandate being lifted right before spring break when many students may be traveling outside of Madison? Why doesn't campus wait until after students have returned and tested for COVID-19?
Thank you. That's a great question. One I certainly understand why people are raising. Again, you know, the decision to make this decision now is really driven by the data, the high level of protection that's already in place, and where we're at with the surge and the prevalence of the coronavirus in our community. What we've learned through a lot of experience is really that transmission of COVID has really been less connected to travel than it has been related to, where we're at with surges in our community and in our country. And so we're past really, I think, that period of greatest concern, and adding that with the level of vaccinations that are already in place, and just, making sure that we continue to avail ourselves of the toolboxes that we can use, our toolbox of options to provide personal protection for ourselves. It's a robust option. Vaccines, boosters, the ability to wear a well-fitting mask. Those are so much more readily available than they were in the past. And so people should continue to take advantage of this when they're available. And then testing, we continue to have very robust testing capacity here on campus, PCR testing for those, as well as a wide availability of antigen testing. And as people prepare or think about what they're going to do if they're going to be traveling, I just encourage you to go ahead and get yourself one of those antigen test kits, actually a couple, one to use before you travel and another to use when you return. And that way you'll just have that added peace of mind about where you're at and your current status. So just, those are readily available. We just encourage people to continue to use those and take full advantage of them.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. I know that I pick up my weekly antigen test and recently used a couple on a visit to family who I hadn't seen in many years. So you talk about sort of decisions that we can make for our own personal health, and I think we'll probably end up talking about that quite a few times today. But we have one of the things I love about our community is how much we look out for one another. I think that probably plays into our high vaccination rate. Of course, we wanted to protect ourselves, but we were concerned about each other when we went and got vaccinated last year. So we're getting a lot of questions about protecting maybe vulnerable people in our community. And that, Devlin, I know maybe you can't speak specifically to what the university is doing, but we do have a question. How is the university protecting immunocompromised or otherwise at-risk students, staff, and faculty after the expiration of the mask mandate? And how can we ensure, and maybe this is something for one of our other panelists, but how can we ensure that people have fair access to the university given their unique risks?
Yeah, that's a great thought. So on a personal level, if you are someone that falls into a population that's considered immunocompromised or is more at risk for this, please do have a conversation with your doctor to make sure that you personally are doing all that you can from a medical standpoint. But with the toolbox that Jake was talking about going out into the world, a combination of vaccines, even if they are in an immunocompromised person, and masking personally really does still confer quite a bit of protection. You can also use kind of more of an isolation standpoint. You can choose to sit farther away. You can choose to ask for certain accommodations. I know that there's others that can speak more effectively to how the McBurney Center works. But what I can say is the tool in our toolbox that we're peeling off right now is just the mask mandate. It's not masks at all. So you certainly, if you feel that you are at higher risk or are in situations that are more high risk, should and can use a mask. So there will be times where we're going to get into more kind of the communication and navigation of making choices that might differ than other people. And again, it's well within your right to keep masking, but I want to say that from the scientific standpoint, from the epidemiologic standpoint, we do still have very effective tools to continue to go forward, including all of the things that you guys have been talking about.
Jake or John, either of you want to weigh in on maybe what the university is doing specifically? I mean, I guess what comes to mind for me is you already mentioned, Jake, testing. We're making that available still. And masks continue to be made available to students and employees.
Yeah, I would really just build on what Dr. Cole has spoke to, taking full advantage of those options that we have available to us. The idea that we really care about each other and each other's well-being is something that I think is a strength of our community. And so, just being thoughtful about how you're spending your time with each other, and, wearing the mask, and modeling that behavior, and explaining to people why you choose to do that, I think is always helpful. And then being thoughtful about those who are around you as well. For folks who have underlying health issues, I also would just remind you that we continue to offer vaccines and boosters for folks through UHS. And there are certainly a part of our population that is at greater risk now that are recommended to consider getting the fourth booster, and we're doing those, and we'll continue to monitor and make that fully available to ourselves as well. And the picture is very different right now than it was a year ago. So I think this is the right time for us to take these steps.
Thanks, Jake. I'm going to go to another instructional question. So this one for John, it's a question from somebody who identified himself or themselves as Jack. Can instructors, including TAs, enforce a mask policy in their classrooms? And if not, can they transition their course modality to online?
Right. So thanks, Kelly, and thanks for the question. Again, the core of the new mask policy that goes into effect on March 12th is that the decision of whether or not to wear a mask is an individual decision. And that means that instructors, including TAs, cannot enforce a mask wearing policy, or for that matter, a policy not to wear masks in their classrooms. Again, it's an individual choice, and instructors, teaching assistants, all of us need to respect the choices that others make about whether or not to wear a mask. Again, as I mentioned earlier, instructors are able to talk about their own choice about whether or not to wear a mask with their classes. They can recommend that students wear masks. In the email, again, that came out from my office, there's some specific suggested language that folks can consider using in that space. Remains really important if we are going to talk to students about wearing masks to recognize the power dynamic in the classroom, and emphasize to students that it is their individual decision and that there won't be consequences for them for that decision. Other part of the question about changing modality to online, the answer to that is also that instructors cannot unilaterally change the modality of their courses. So course modality, in-person, hybrid, online, is a decision that's made at the department level, reviewed and approved at the school college level, and those are decisions that are made before the semester starts, and instructors aren't able to change that modality at this point.
Thanks, John. Next question is for you, Devlin. And this comes back to, I think, maybe something that we talked about earlier, but should working staff who were boosted more than 5 months ago, so fully vaccinated, got their booster, it's been more than 5 months, should they consider getting another booster, given that there have been reports that boosters start to lose some of their effectiveness over time?
That's a great question, Kelly. And I want to highlight the difference to tie it back to that immunocompromised question earlier. A 3-dose series plus a booster is currently recommended for immunocompromised patients. A 2-dose series plus a booster is currently recommended for the general population. And it does not look like at an FDA level, there is going to be a recommendation to continue to get boosters as of right now. We're entering the world where we're beginning to kind of reflect on the data that we have from Omicron, as well as kind of more of this longitudinal data, actually seeing some distance from the times of vaccines. And there may not be as much of a wane as we are thinking. There may be somewhat of a difference between mRNA versus the Johnson & Johnson vaccines, but in general, it is not necessary, it's not recommended. There's not been any demonstrable harm to it, so I can't physically stop you from doing it. But I wouldn't say that that's something that we need to majorly focus on right now. It's going to be huge when we can get the final clearance for 6 months to 4 years to get a whole bunch of children vaccinated as well. I think that will impact the trajectory of the pandemic. And it looks like the FDA has just delayed that meeting to discuss the Pfizer approval for that from the middle of February to, they haven't quite set a date, but I would assume that that's going to be sometime in March. So that would be the next kind of vaccine nugget to kind of look out for. But I would also say that a lot of this is probably feeling, we've gotten through 3, 4, maybe kind of mini pandemics at this point, and this one was quite quick. This one was a very fast rise, and we seem to be having a very fast fall. So we don't seem to be rushing into making any kind of longer term decisions. We're going to see where the data is telling us to go, and it's looking like the data from South Africa and Denmark are showing that Our vaccines that we have them currently seem to be working well. So I wouldn't worry too much about that at this moment.
Thanks, Dr. Cole. That does seem to be sort of an important point that I've heard in my conversations, is that like this is where we are now, right? And we can't predict the future. But
gosh, if I could, my goodness, I would love that. I cannot predict the future, but if anybody else can, give me a call.
But we can and are continuing to evaluate data coming from so many places. It's kind of amazing, the amount of data that we have.
It's overwhelming, one would say.
Yes, maybe so, especially for people like you. Have to follow this closely. Jake, I wanted to get back to a question from an audience member who identified themselves as Haley. And I think the question seems to maybe center around rec-well facilities. She says that students with health conditions must be able to feel safe while using health facilities on campus, but these facilities are typically full with crowded equipment and it's difficult to social distance. So how can pending policy changes influence the risk for students with disabilities and health conditions who might be at higher risk?
Sure. Thank you for that question, and I certainly appreciate that. We're all thinking about that as we re-enter or enter into spaces now, in particular as we sort of adjust to the idea that we won't need to wear a mask. And I think we just need to remind ourselves of why that decision was something that was appropriate now. Is, again, the population here at UW-Madison has been extraordinarily cooperative about getting vaccinated. So we have one of the highest vaccination rates in the country right here in our community and right here on our campus. So we should draw some comfort from that. We also, as Dr. Cole said earlier, I think anybody has significant underlying health issues should really consult with their physician to understand what things that they should do or not do, and wherever they're able to go ahead and be vaccinated and get boosted as recommended. Those additional layers. We've also just really, I think, doubled down on our efforts to keep places as clean as possible and to really maintain those. I noticed that on a recent airplane ride that I took for the first time after a couple of years, how thorough folks are doing that. I assure you that the staff at Rec-Well are just as invested in that. And then individuals again who are concerned also should consider continuing to wear that face mask. I think we're all concerned about everybody and their well-being, but I think the layers of protection that are available to us now should provide a level of protection that is going to take us a little time to get used to, but I think is there.
Thanks, Jake. I want to just take a pause here to say, if you're just joining us, welcome. We're sharing audience submitted questions with our panelists right now. You can use the link in the YouTube description or here on the screen to submit yours. And there's also a live captioning link in the YouTube description if that's something you'd like to access. Let's go back to John. We have a question about flexibilities for instructors who may not feel comfortable teaching in a room full of unmasked students, especially faculty who might be at high risk because of their personal health, or they might have young unvaccinated children at home. So what are their options?
Yeah, and I want to, of course, first acknowledge that I am the member of the panel who is not a health expert. I'm a political scientist. But I do want to just reemphasize what Jake and Devlin have said about the importance of those who are able being vaccinated, being boosted, following the guidance of their own medical provider. And of course, we all will still have the option of wearing masks in the classroom, and campus is still making available, of course, to instructors, those high efficiency face masks. So you can again check with your department if you need more supplies of those KN95, N95 type masks, and we're still working at the campus level to ensure supply of those. So I think those basic things are important for all of us, and of course important for instructors who have particular health concerns. It's also important to note that instructors with particular health concerns of their own are able to explore through the accommodations process possibilities for accommodations, and that would work through the divisional diversity or divisional disability representative for instructors who have concerns about being in the classroom that aren't related to their own health, and so wouldn't go through that accommodations process. They should be working with and talking to their human resources representatives at the local level, at their department or unit level. And then again, thinking about the ability that all instructors have to recommend or ask students in the classroom to wear masks. And I think, individual instructor can certainly think through and make their own decision about how much they would like to share with students about why they're making that request. I have my 85-year-old mother in Missouri who's vaccinated and boosted, and if I were going to see her the next weekend, I might share that news and ask students again to carefully consider wearing masks in the classroom. So I think we can think about trying to have some of those open, honest conversations. Again, what we're not able to do is require masks in the classroom, and we need to make that clear to students. So. So I think those are the main, courses of action and recourses for instructors with those concerns.
Thanks, John. This is a related question, but maybe we'll go to Jake. It's a question from somebody who identified as a concerned professor with small children. So I guess I'll make an assumption that small children meaning under 5, so not able to be vaccinated. How will UW support faculty, staff, and students who are responsible for taking care of at-risk individuals? So, maybe you're not personally the one at risk, but you worry about people at home.
Yeah, I thank you for that question. And you're seeing a theme with some of our responses. The circumstances are very different from what they were just a year ago, and so we have these strategies now that weren't available to us previously, and that's why they were so important to be just so vigilant on, in particular, wearing masks and keeping distance between each other before. We have a different kind of set of circumstances now with the protections that are available to us. And this question really actually sort of really resonates with me personally. I live with somebody who has underlying health conditions, so I'm very conscious of that. I think about when I'm wearing a mask and who I'm spending time with. And if I'm unsure or uncertain about that, I'll choose to wear a mask just to add that other layer of protection. And then the practices that we all learned or relearned about washing our hands and just taking that extra time to think about what we're doing. I think those are all practices that have served us well, and we shouldn't forget them. And the campus has been really, I think, very, very sensitive and responsive to trying to support individuals who are navigating some of these complex issues. And I know there's a lot of support through DDRs and supervisors to help people work through those questions. And I do know that that the work on the vaccine for the younger children is progressing. I hope that we are feeling reassured that they're taking the extra time to make sure that it's ready and it's the right amount of approach to support our younger children who haven't been vaccinated yet.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. On that, Dr. Cole, can you maybe talk a little bit about how people should be thinking about risk right now, whether you're in the vaccinated category or for young children? I mean, I know that parents in particular of young children have had a particularly rough time, especially given that we don't have an approved vaccine yet. And so, these are very valid concerns.
Absolutely. It's been really interesting for me to reflect back to March 2020 and all of the different phases that we've had of this pandemic, because our toolkit has had to change actually quite rapidly at times to accommodate new variants, to accommodate new tools that have become available. So our risk assessments may still be using old viewpoints. When it comes to small children, we do still have the problem that they can't yet get vaccinated. So that is very much weighing on our minds. The good thing about the Omicron variant is that it had the ability early on to block out the Delta variant. So that variant fell quite quickly. And with Omicron, it does seem to be causing less severe disease. Now, back in March of 2020, as we were all locking down and trying to get hand sanitizer and toilet paper, things looked different. And what we were trying to do then and now is keep people out of the hospital, keep people from dying, because we didn't have anything to stand in the way besides a ventilator. And so really it came down to ventilator management. With the cases falling, with the cases being less severe, even though they are more widespread, we are seeing a drop in deaths, thank goodness. We are seeing a drop in hospitalizations. All of this is incredibly good news. We have a monoclonal antibody. It was just this week approved via Eli Lilly that is fairly effective against the Omicron variant, which is yet another tool that we can plug a gap in. And most people, especially vaccinated and boosted individuals, if they do get sick, are still having mild symptoms. Please, if you are having trouble breathing, go to the hospital. I don't want to minimize your symptoms in any way, but in general, we are using a mindset of, earlier, I can't get COVID. And we've gotten to a point where it might be a little bit more okay if that does happen. It's scary. It's hard to get used to, but that's why we have testing, and that's why we have our personal masks that we can use. When it comes to small kids, I know it's been just incredibly difficult, and the March FDA date, or whenever they choose to reschedule that, can't come fast enough. But it's been a huge relief to have, the 5 to 11 population. And so, little by little, we are chipping away at this, which is probably why it feels a little counterintuitive to be pulling things off, because we've just dedicated a solid 24 months to completely reorganize our entire lives. It's been what a wild ride, guys. I have to just applaud Dane County. It's been a pleasure living here. But scientifically, epidemiologically, we are in a good place. We are in a better place. I can't say that there's light at the end of the tunnel. There is a second subvariant of Omicron. It doesn't seem to be causing more problems. It's not so bad that they're giving it another Greek letter. Boy, did we all learn our Greek letters these couple of years. But at the moment, I have massive amounts of empathy and some reassurance. So scientifically, epidemiologically, things are looking okay. You can have faith in your vaccine, you can have faith in your neighbor's vaccine, and you can have faith in your N95. Please have a good seal. It's a little tougher to get that air exchange going, but spring is coming, and hopefully good news with it.
Thanks, Dr. Cole. And I'm glad that you mentioned subvariants and variants, because we have a couple of questions sort of along those lines. And so I'd hope to go there next. And also, I took a year of Greek language in college. I had no idea it would actually come in handy. So I'm going to go to Jake with a question from James, who wants to know, what are the campus plans if we had another major wave? For instance, with this Omicron BA.2 subvariant, which might be the one that you've heard about in places like Denmark, or in the wake of a sporting event, or James also asked about spring break. So if travel related to spring break were to lead to a significant increase, what would campus do?
Sure. Well, what I want to remind folks of is that we've got a lot of experience, really monitoring, and we've learned a lot from this past couple of years. And so we're going to continue to monitor the data like we have throughout this period of time. Just because we decided to change the mask policy at this point because we feel like it's safe to do so. Doesn't mean we're going to stop paying attention to what's going on and look for those early indicators of something changing. I'll remind folks that last summer we had a period of time where we felt comfortable pulling the mask down, and as the summer progressed, circumstances developed that really suggested that we should reinstate the mask requirement. We did that. It wasn't necessarily a wildly popular decision, but it was one that we felt was right. And I know the campus is prepared to make decisions like that when the data tells us that that's the right thing to do. I would also point out about that decision last summer, we didn't have as much data as we do now about, first of all, what the virus looks like, how it shows up, as well as our level of vaccination. We were still gathering that as we prepared for the fall. Now that we know that we have such a high level of vaccination and how well and effective the vaccines are, those decisions are less tricky than they were in the past. But we're going to continue to monitor this, and just rest assured that if circumstances change, we will make other recommendations and decisions as needed.
Thanks, Jake. We have a question about, I think it's a question that's about testing and absenteeism. So maybe we can briefly go to UW and to talk about sort of the role of testing in our current environment, and then maybe John for some guidance on what happens when a lot of students are missing. So the question is, this is somebody who identified as an instructor and said it's been extremely difficult to accommodate students missing class due to required quarantining after they test positive. We would actually say that's isolation. If you test positive, you isolate. You quarantine when you've been exposed but don't have a case. So the question is, students who have to isolate after testing positive is leading to absenteeism. Those students might not necessarily have symptoms. So maybe we could talk about the role of testing and isolation, and then John, what that means, like how can instructors navigate that if we see that again. I think right now our case rates are low enough that we're not seeing a lot of absenteeism, but we could.
Thanks, Kelly. I love your specificity and the use of your language. Quarantining and isolation are really hard to keep apart in our minds, but they do represent two very different things. So if somebody around you that you have had close contact with for 15 minutes, so closer than 6 feet, regardless of masking status, if you need to quarantine, if you are vaccinated, can go out into the world wearing a mask. And if you are not, it's going to be different. You are going to have to quarantine at home or somewhere where you're separated. Isolation, if you've tested positive, means that you need to stay home for 5 days. And then for the second half, it used to be 10 days. The second half of those 5 days, you need to wear a well-fitting mask. I highly recommend using a surgical mask or an N95 for that. So theoretically, with an incredibly high vaccinated population here on campus, quarantining will probably not impact your ability to go to class, and isolation should really only last for 5 days staying at home. So that is unfortunately a week of classes for most people. But I think it's really important to keep testing. We used to not have enough tests. We didn't even have enough swabs. This was back in the day where we didn't have enough toilet paper. And kind of just like toilet paper, when we have enough, we don't think about the importance of it. So right now we have enough, and we may not be focusing on how important it is to regularly test. Please test, and please go on the CDC website and follow isolation procedures. Let your friends know they need to quarantine and test as well. In quarantine, you're going to test on about day 5 to 7, depending on what your exposure was. It's really important to keep that going. And I would recommend that for even anybody with a sore throat. I want to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves outside of the time of COVID as well. We should be taking illness seriously and trying to catch up on our work and our reading after we feel better.
Thanks, Dr. Cole. And John, how about absenteeism?
Sure. And I don't want to say that this is the most difficult thing, because there's a lot of difficult things in our lives at this point, and a lot of really challenging things about being an instructor at this point in time. But I know, and I've experienced this myself, and I certainly have talked to colleagues who have experienced this, that it's really challenging to navigate what is just some tension here, right? Between, our being mostly in person for classes and very much wanting students to attend class, and our students wanting to attend class. Some tension between that and the other reality of our lives, which is, thankfully less so right now, but still now, some of our students, missing class because they're doing exactly what we're asking them to do, which is to quarantine and isolate as they need to. I'm super thankful to be able to rely on and trust my medical expert colleagues. I won't always get that distinction between isolation and quarantine right. But we have these wonderful colleagues we can lean on and trust. And one of the things that you've just heard from my colleagues, I think, is that we continue to be in a fluid and dynamic situation. And so, I know that instructors are working through navigating that challenge right now of the importance of having our students in class. And again, at the same time, recognizing that we need to support students as they do what we ask them to do as regards quarantine and isolation. So I don't have a neat and easy answer about how to navigate that space. As much as anything, I want to acknowledge the challenge of doing that. But the broader point for me too is around that the dynamic nature of the situation we're in, and I've been reflecting on this a lot for my own teaching, but also for campus as a whole. I think what you hear from Jake and Devlin is that we're in a better place right now than we've been with the pandemic. Hopefully, we'll continue in that better place. But COVID's not going to disappear anytime in the near future. And so we may well see, continued changes in the context in which we're working and living and for instructors teaching. And it's possible that campus guidance we know that campus guidance will adapt if those changes come along. And so, in that context, one thing that I'm certainly thinking about as an instructor and feeling the need for and feeling empathy for my fellow instructors out there is we've all got to do some thinking about the longer term impact of the situation in which we find ourselves on our teaching. And that means on our pedagogical choices. And most immediately, that means on things like our attendance policy. One thing that I've thought a lot about through the pandemic is that this experience has reminded us that time together with students is a scarce commodity. I hate calling it a commodity, a scarce resource. It's a precious thing. And we need to make sure that we're making the best use of it we can. We need to make sure that we are letting students know why it's important to be in class in person. And then we also need to recognize that we are in this fluid dynamic situation with a virus that is still present. And we may need to make some changes to how we think about attendance policy. So that's not, I recognize, either a particularly helpful and maybe not a particularly soothing message I just gave, but I do think it's the reality we find ourselves in. And so would really encourage my fellow instructors to be thinking, not just in the short term, but in the long term, about how am I gonna use that precious resource of time with my students? How am I going to encourage my students to be in class when they're able to? And how am I going to recognize the fact, and it just is a fact of our context now, that students are going to miss class at times. The reality is they missed class before the pandemic, right? And we had to deal with that. It's a different context now. And I would just encourage us all to think carefully and creatively about how we respond.
Thanks, John. And I think Jake had a follow-up to that as well.
Yeah, thank you, John. I really appreciate you sharing those remarks. And one of the things that I've been not surprised by, but very pleased to hear, is that when I've talked to students who have, trying to understand why we're at this point, why we're making these decisions, one of the things that recurrently comes up is that they're concerned about their faculty and their TAs and the individuals that they're around. They want to make sure that they're doing what they should be doing to protect them. So I know there's genuine concern among the student population, and I think that will only bode well as conversations occur and people make individual decisions about what masks to wear, where to wear it, and so forth.
Thanks, Jake. And then one really quick clarification on quarantine policy, in particular in light of conversations about absenteeism, but also because we have boosters as an option available to us. People make booster choices for their personal health, but there's a community reason for that as well. Could you maybe clarify that, Dr. Cole?
Absolutely. When I say that you can quarantine using only a mask, that is only true if you are up to date with your vaccines, which means that applies the day after you get boosted. So we used to have to, wait a 2-week period, and we love to confuse you all, right? This is what it means. You need a full vaccine series plus a booster. and you're considered up to date. And that will lead you to different quarantine outcomes. Please do check the CDC website. This does update fairly frequently as we get more and more data behind it. So it can always be helpful to look that up. And it's a great reason to get boosted. So come on down to UHS.
Yeah, I'd also say you check the COVID response website as well, and FAQs. We do our best on the communications front to get as much updated information on that site as possible. We have about 15 minutes left, so I want to say if you're just joining us or joined us recently, thank you for being here. You can still submit your questions. We're doing our best to get to as many of them as we can. The link for that should be in the description, as is a link for live captions. Jake, we have a question for you about mental health resources. What is available for students in particular who might feel some extra anxiety about going to class when the mask requirement on campus lifts? And then anything you can say for employees?
Sure. Well, so this is something that we're all very, very aware of, and doing everything we can to prepare to support staff and students. Throughout this pandemic, anxiety and stress have been a part of added anxiety and stress. Has been something that all of us have had to navigate, and some of us are able to do that, through additional information. Sometimes we need additional support, and so if students continue to have access through the mental health services here at UHS. There's still services available. We have a staff that's acutely aware of the circumstances and prepared to support individuals as needed. And I just encourage folks to take advantage of it if they feel like they would benefit from talking to somebody else. It's also helpful just to self-educate yourself about kind of where things are at, listening to knowledge that's being shared in situations like this town hall, I think may help answer and reassure folks. But from the employee side, the Employee Assistance Office has done a terrific job of responding to employees' needs throughout this period of time, and I know that they are committed to sustaining that level of support and helping folks navigate what might be a stressful period of time.
I think many of us have had to cope with a lot of stress the past couple of years. So good to take advantage of those resources. Somewhat similar to the questions that we've had before, but I think it would be good to get to is a question from the audience. Maybe we'll start with John. It's from somebody who identifies as a department administrator. Can instructors, and this is in line with sort of the mental health and the anxiety about being in spaces on campus, can instructors ask or recommend that students in a 3-hour course, so maybe some of the longer courses that we have on campus or in seminars, can they recommend mask wearing? And can a staff member at higher risk request that close coworkers wear masks? We spent time talking about students and instructors, but what about other employees on campus?
Sure. And so just to, say again, in the instructional space, whether we're talking about a lecture hall or a seminar room or a lab, again, ultimately the decision of whether or not to wear a mask is up to the individual. That's up to the individual instructor, up to the individual student. That said, again, in all of those instructional settings, instructors can ask students to wear masks. They can recommend that students wear masks. Would really, again, point you to the message that came out from my office that's got some sample language that folks can consider and adapt. Folks can share their own reasons for wearing a mask. I can imagine in that 3-hour lab, someone talking about, hey, I'm going to wear a mask during our time together here because we're going to be in this space pretty close to one another for the next 3 hours. So I'm going to wear a mask. Would really recommend and appreciate if you wear a mask. That's entirely appropriate. Again, what we aren't able to do is to require students to wear masks in any particular setting. As we're saying, we also can't require them not to wear masks. So an instructor can't ask a student to take their mask off. That really is the student's individual decision. And really the same goes in other settings, interacting with each other in office spaces or other spaces around campus. We can certainly recommend that someone else wear a mask. We can explain our reasons for wearing a mask, but we certainly can't require someone to wear a mask. And I think we all want to be attentive to the power dynamics that can develop in various situations, and be mindful of those as we navigate these conversations. I'm not naive. I know that there will be some challenging conversations around masks to come in the second half of March. That's certainly going to be the case. I imagine that those will happen occasionally in the classroom. They'll happen in our office spaces. I don't want to deny that. And I also think I have great faith and trust in our students and in my colleagues, both faculty and staff colleagues, that we're gonna navigate those conversations in a collegial way. And I was thinking earlier when Jake was talking about that idea of a community of care, and I think we have a real opportunity here to continue to build and nurture that community of care as we navigate this next step regarding masking.
Thanks, John. We're running a little bit short on time, so I'm probably going to do a little bit of condensing of some of our remaining questions just to make sure we get to more of them. So I want to go back to Jake. This is probably a brief question, but we've talked about the expiration of the mask requirement on campus, but are there going to be spaces on campus? And this is a question from Cameron, for instance, in healthcare, where masks are still going to be required?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And there will be situations, really more clinical settings where direct patient care is involved, that wearing a mask will still be a requirement, and you will see information at each of those locations about that guidance when it's necessary. But we're really following what are good public health protocols in that clinical setting. And so as that continues to evolve, we will update that information. But there will be limited spaces on campus where clinical care takes place that wearing a mask will still be an expectation.
Thanks, Jake. Dr. Cole, can we maybe talk about that, parsing the nuance between being fully vaccinated and being boosted? We have a question. Is it reasonable to say that the percentage of those who are boosted matters more than the percentage of those who've had only 2 doses? If you got an mRNA vaccine.
What a fun epidemiologic question. Here's what I will say. Our definition of what up-to-date vaccination-wise has changed. So I will not differ from the CDC. I generally find that they give great guidance. I think PM Public Health Madison-Dane County tends to follow what they say. So earlier in the pandemic, 1 dose was better than no doses, right? But time passed, and it was actually quite important that you got that second dose. And then time passed, and we saw, oh, gee, there's a little bit more of a wane, and so we should probably recommend getting boosted. And time may pass, and we may put this in our flu shots. We may, have this available every fall. So what I would say is we keep updating what it is based on what we know is important. And right now, considering being up to date means having that extra booster. I would say that that's an important data point to have. We in the epidemiologic community will continue to change our endpoints based on what we see as the best and highest standard of care, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Cole. Jake, we have a question here from an audience member who identifies as being from either the Black or Hispanic community, or maybe both. Not clear on the question, but I don't want to leave out their identity. The pandemic has disproportionately affected Black and Hispanic members of our community, and in particular, the hospitalization rates of children from these communities has been higher than in their white counterparts. So has any thought been given to how the mask change will affect these members of our community and the climate on campus? Were the voices of minority members heard or taken into account when making these decisions?
Thank you for that question. That's a really important one. And I can just say throughout the pandemic, there's been great care and attention given to making sure that our entire campus community has the best information available and the most access that can be provided to all the supports that are available. And we've done things throughout this period of time. For example, making sure that all shifts of staff that work throughout the campus have access to testing and vaccine clinics. We've spent some time making sure that the languages are available to help people fully understand that. And then really trying to address concerns that individuals might have around vaccine hesitancy. I mean, it's an individual decision for everyone, and we understand and respect that, but we also want to be ready to answer the questions that folks might have about the vaccine and why they might want to think about taking it, helping people understand the safety of it. And so that message has been consistent and widely available. And so that's allowed us to get to this level of protection in our community that I think is just not been more achieved in any other setting than the success we've had here. But our entire community is really important to make sure that they understand and feel supported, and we'll continue to work on that.
Yeah, thank you, Jake. Harking back to John's community of care comments earlier, I think sometimes we need to be especially mindful of that and who that applies to. Well, with our couple of remaining minutes, I wanted to, anybody want to speak up quickly? Okay. I wanted to ask Devlin, I think our last question that we have time for, and this again comes from the audience, what role should measures like masking and remote work play in the future? This is sort of looking ahead. What will be the best way for public health officials, local policymakers to track COVID-19 going forward?
Those are great questions. We are all very aware of some of the tools in our toolkit right now, which is amazing. I remember being slightly uncomfortable with how many people learned how to wash their hands properly in March of 2020. So my answer to that question is most definitely don't throw your masks away. Keep a stash around. We have viral illnesses that come in every flu season, and we are now much better at assessing risk-based situations and can use those tools in our toolkit a little bit more effectively than we could before this pandemic. So those are still very much available to us. And surveillance will absolutely continue on this. I don't think anybody feels that this is going to immediately disappear. And we do tend to have observation of a lot of different viral illnesses that go on behind the scenes that the general population probably isn't even aware of. So have faith that the community is doing what they need, the scientific community, to continue to monitor this. And as we've all kind of talked about thus far, just because we're peeling off mask mandates doesn't mean that we can't put them back on. We can escalate all the way up to, lockdowns and social isolation and things like that, places where we have been and hopefully will not have to revisit for quite a while. But those are public health tools, and we know that they are available to us. And we can hopefully continue to slide down the personal need to put these kind of layers on to socially distance and eventually get back to a place where we're kind of functioning closer together with smaller amounts of risk. But we have them in our back pocket, and we're ready to use them when need be.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cole. I want to actually wrap here and just say thank you so much to you, to Jake, to John for spending the time answering questions. I know there's a lot of questions that we didn't get to. Please continue to keep an eye on your campus email for ongoing updates. You might see answers to lingering questions there. Watch the COVID response site. That's covidresponse.wisc.edu. Continue to consult our campus FAQs. They do reflect the questions that you are sending to various people on campus, and in particular to the COVID response email address. That's covidresponse@vc.wisc.edu. I know my colleagues are doing their best every day to monitor that email address and incorporate and answer your questions. So if you didn't get a chance to get your question asked today, please check all those resources. Thank you for joining us. We will have another one of these sessions in a couple of weeks, so that's another opportunity to ask more questions. In the meantime, though, stay safe and be well.